this presentation, this session. Now, we move on to our next session, that is panel discussion. And Dr. Manoj Chawla sir is being with us. And sir needs no introduction. Already we have introduced the sir. And sir is a moderator. And now we will discuss about the future prospects and limitations of technology in diabetes care. And we have 3 speakers. Now Dr. Manoj Chawla sir will introduce them. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So we have a wonderful panel here today to discuss the future perspectives in technology and, of course, the limitations. Let me start by introducing Dr. Alok Gupta, who's a consultant pediatrician and diabetologist at the Pediatric Department, Dartford and Gravesham NHS Trust, Dartford since 2015. He's been working in child health for over the last 3 decades and has served various hospital and external committees and presently serving London and Southeast Coast Children's Diabetes Regional Clinical Network as a co-chair. We welcome you to this panel, Dr. Alok Gupta. Joining him today is a close friend, Dr. Suresh Purohit, who is a diabetologist in Mumbai. He's a diabetes care physician, hyperbaric medicine specialist, and consultant diabetologist at the Sugar Doctor Medicare in Mumbai. Has over, again, 3 decades of experience as a diabetes care physician, founder member of Sugar Doctor Medicare LLP. And he's a life member with various associations. And the first person whom actually, I would coin the term of interventional diabetologist and inspired many of us to get into technology. Suresh. With that, it gives me great pleasure again to introduce Dr. Jyoti Dev, known as the Technology Man of India, and again a guide, mentor, and inspiration to many of us. Chairman at the Jyoti Dev's Diabetes Research Center, Trivandrum, Kochi and Attingal, managing trustee of the PK Savedh Trust, editor-in-chief of the journal, which is also the official journal with the DTech group, the International Journal of Diabetes and Technology, first author for Indian guidelines on vaccination pumps and glucose monitoring, and somebody who's been an invited speaker at ATTD as a speaker and has been presenting his work at ATTD, AD, and many other global conferences, and is the face of technology from India for many of us. And joining the 3 panelists is Dr. Henry Enald. Henry is a physician scientist, board certified pediatric endocrinologist, experienced CMO leader, experience in institutionalizing startup into highly matrixed organization. He's participated in various regulatory submissions. He currently has a part-time practice of pediatric endocrinology, recognized as a global KOL. And if I'm not mistaken, Henry is now heading the affairs for Embecta, which is the new diabetes division from BD. And I had the pleasure of meeting Henry in Barcelona a week back. So let me welcome the panel here, which is Dr. Henry, Dr. Jyoti Dev, Dr. Alok Gupta, and Dr. Suresh Purohit. So we have a complete hour in front of us. When you have slides and presentations, it makes life easier. But when you don't have that, it's going to be a lot of discussion from us. And let me start by asking our first panelist, Dr. Alok Gupta. So here in this session, we are going to be discussing both the future aspects in technology, what we have seen at the ATTD this year, what we have also learned at the DTechCon over the last 2 days, and then also discussing the various limitations of technology as we move on. So let me start by asking Dr. Alok Gupta that we did have Dr. Ganesh speak in the earlier session on challenges in monitoring and CGMs in the pediatric population. What are the challenges that you see in terms of not just monitoring, but adaptation of technology in the pediatric population diabetes in the UK? Dr. Alok. You're mute, Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, you're correct. So morning, Manoj, from London, and morning to all of you. And hopefully you're having a nice afternoon in India. And thanks for inviting me for this session, which really got miscommunicated. I didn't have any information until 10 minutes ago, I think, to how to join the meeting.
Apologies for that. Yeah.
But that's really, we are very ready for random spontaneous speeches. So once again, we are here. But I think your question is very valid. And you are asking, I think Jyoti Dev asked Partha about how do we manage in UK and USA about technology. It's not very different, to be honest, because we worked in many systems and we know, I think the challenges are the same because around the patient's behavior and the cost. And that really two important key limitations, I suspect, I think, in using technology in any setting. Unless you make a technology in bulk at very low cost price, and which public doesn't need to bear that responsibility or burden. That's really one important point. And number two, how do you make, I think, public to buy in or make them understand to use the technology as much as, because we have around 70% of children on pump. Hardly many children or families, they download their data. So we still need to do spoon feeding. Most of the pump, they are really supported by NHS funding. But when it comes to CGM, we have a very patchy arrangement in the NHS. So there's not really real funding of CGM to these patients and families. They hardly get onto CGM because unless that cost is supported by somebody as a system provider, they can't afford it and they don't have any motivation to use it. So that's really I would just open the session, I think, by these two big limitations. And I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
So let me take the same question to the other pediatric endocrinologist on the panel, Dr. Henry. Well, you still practice pediatric endocrinology in the US. What challenges do you see in that population in terms of adaptation of technology or moving towards that?
Thank you, Manoj, for the question. And Jyoti, excuse me, it was great to meet you as well in Barcelona. You know, I want to follow my comments after Dr. Gupta. I think it really raises the question, at least in the US, about the technical limitations, the educational limitations, and cost limitations. And if we look at other places in the world, for example, the adoption of technology is quite disparate. For example, if you look at Scandinavia, the uptake is so much higher. And in the US, unfortunately, may depend on what socioeconomic group a patient may belong to, the attitude of the physician, and the lack of uniformity to access based on multiple payers. So we are not yet at a point where technical solutions provide the relief of burden so that patients do not have to look at their data or try to make some conclusions based on their data. And literacy and numeracy play such an important role. And again, we try to do this in mass, but the ability to account for different levels of literacy and numeracy also provide great challenges in adoption. We talk about cost. For those who don't have insurance coverage as it is in the US, these technologies are beyond reach. So I think the challenges really are technical, educational, and cost. But there's so much more to say as we have advances in artificial pancreas or automated insulin delivery, where the promise of total relief of the burden for someone living with diabetes sometimes is an elusive goal. And as we've seen in products on the market today, not every solution works for the same person living with diabetes. And obviously over time, we expect with big data and data analytics for artificial intelligence, all of these very grandiose words, but I do believe that there is an opportunity for technology to further relieve the burden of people living with diabetes.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Henry. And let me take the next question to Dr. Jyoti Dev. Jyoti, you were there at the ATTD. I'm going to ask you to help me by summarizing your top 5 advances or studies or the future aspects that you saw which have excited you the most. So I need you to give me 5 of those sessions or learnings or things or advances in technology which excite you the most.
ATTD, Dr. Manoj, always have been very exciting for me for all these years. And anyway, one excitement is we have met Dr. Henry Angel there. Hello. So every year at the ATTD, we are witnessing a growth of CGMs and insulin pumps. So in the earlier days, it was only insulin pumps, but nowadays, for the last 3-4 years, we have been witnessing a huge growth in the continuous glucose monitoring devices. And there are multiple players. And there are players from China. I don't want to name them. And I have seen that Partha also presenting in his paper one CGM from China. And I am sure that Dr. Alok Gupta should also be using the same. So that means some of these products which are less priced are also becoming more common. And probably they are also having an accuracy and reliability matching with the similar devices, time-tested devices in the market. And then I have been closely observing at the growth of non-invasive monitoring systems. And that is the 4th generation of sensors. And I presented the data yesterday at our conference, DataCon. And that is also quite promising. The non-invasive glucose meters and the non-invasive continuous glucose monitoring devices. And I still remember at the ATTD in 2008 or 2009, looking at one of the Raman spectroscopy devices based on scattering of the light and measuring the glucose values and found to be very reliable. But unfortunately, whatever we see at the ATTD, 95 to 96% of those startups never reach the market because they fail in the clinical trials. So we even made a suggestion yesterday in one of the similar meetings that when the startups, they are mostly engineers, because in the ATTD we have seen that most of these startups are exclusively engineers, they are not doctors. So from day one onwards, if they can have some conversations and meetings with doctors involved in clinical practice, then probably they'll be much more successful. They are actually initiating conversation with doctors only reaching a certain level in their clinical trials or in their experiments. Then only they are meeting the doctors and discuss. I met a group where they were discussing with me that they have invented a socks where they are implanting multiple sensors, and this is meant for not just glucose sensing, but continuous glucose sensing. And in the ATTD, another finding is time in range has now become a pivotal component, and everybody is now discussing on time in range. And simultaneously, there are questions on where is the evidence on how to determine and how you have determined that 180 is level 1, 250 is level 2, and how this data can be interpreted in type 2 diabetes. Where is the evidence? Do you have any concrete clinical data or clinical trials to show the same sort of evidence in type 2 diabetes? So how can you say that the same percentage range can be used in type 2 and not only in type 1? So such questions we keep on hearing in all the conferences. So probably we need more data to substantiate, because this also originated in 2019 in ATTD conference. Then more of automated insulin delivery devices. So earlier it used to be the T-Slim, the Medtronic, the Omnipod. So now I have seen multiple players where they have combined the insulin delivery with continuous glucose monitoring systems. And I have seen a huge growth in algorithms, because I believe that algorithms are the most important component in automating the delivery of insulin. Even 780G, I believe it has been successful after incorporating the DREAMED algorithm from Tadej Batilno, Thomas Dan, and Moshe Philip. And Medtronic has acquired the DREAMED algorithm, and that has actually helped in automating not only the delivery of basal, but also the delivery of bolus. So that is one device where even the bolus is partly automated. And we are all witnessing a huge change. And that has been a path-breaking innovation. For us, it is a game changer in India, 780G. I think most of you will agree with, because we don't have any other devices available in India for automated delivery device. And then I have seen in the earlier days in ATTD, lot of glucose meter manufacturers there existing, but now it is slowly fading. There are less players from the glucose meters. I could see only LifeScan very active. And even LifeScan has told me that they are also coming with a CGM device. And I presented on GenDeal data. And GenDeal is a painless Lancer, which can be used in type 1 as well as in type 2 diabetes. And this is meant for painless glucose testing and can be used with any Lancet. And that is special about GenDeal. It can be used with any Lancet from any manufacturer. And it is based on a vacuum. It creates a small vacuum. And with the help of a vacuum, it will extract blood. So these are some of the findings which I find very exciting from ATTD. Of course, I cannot summarize the first 5 findings. Of course, Manoj can do that. But I can witness that ATTD has become a very, very, very big meeting when compared to it used to be 14 years ago. Because I have been attending from the first year onwards, it has become very, very big and very exciting. So I will not miss any ATTD in the future.
Right. Wonderful, Jyoti. Yes, so as Jyoti said, many advances discussed there, and that's another aspect of this panel discussion. The data for the hybrid closed loop system, the 780G in type 1, the ADAPT study was released at the ATTD, which showed the benefits of the hybrid closed loop automated delivery in type 1. And of course, the one other study which was also discussed there was the in-range study, which was a comparison between degludec and U300 glargine and as an aspect to the time in range. And it really showed no difference between these two newer generation 2 basal insulins. I can see Dr. Alok Gupta wanting to contribute. Yes, Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Manoj. Actually, just really I felt a bit reactive here rather than anything more. But Jyoti, I think I completely agree with you what you said, and completely agree with Henry's comments. But just really, when you talk about the players, we talked about engineers, we talked about doctors. I'm sure we need an investor. But one thing, really, the most important thing out of this, I think, is missing is the patients and families. Unless you bring them in as a key players, I'm not sure it's going to work, because the buy-in comes from the patients and family. What suits them, not what engineer, doctor, or investor feel about it. So just to make a complete list, we definitely need a patients user group when we're designing the technology in order to make sure it's effective and we hear their view. And I'm really quite a strong advocate to the patients and families. So that's the reason, sorry, I have to be a bit reactive here. Thank you.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's the idea. So we take our next question to Dr. Suresh Purohit. Suresh, you've had a vast experience of use of pumps, especially in patients with type 2 diabetes. So my question to you is, any challenges, especially with pumps in a type 2 population? And how do you see the usage and future of technology, especially in type 2 population?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the organizing committee and members to invite me on this extraordinary conference and meeting. And I welcome every one of you here on the same platform. And I really want to share that when I started using pump, I practice in South Bombay, and there are hardly any type 1 diabetes, most of the type 1 diabetics are in the suburb area and all. So it was really difficult for me to find patient for type 1 patient. So type 2 were in abundance. And in those areas, most of them are all out of control. HbA1c was all 10, 11. And, they were having a lot of problem. And as the diabetes education was taking a lead in that time, people were getting aware of controlling diabetes. So I used to run a patient education program every weekend in the YMCA in Colaba. And a lot of patients used to come. And So the awareness was about controlling diabetes and bringing HbA1c to normal. So that gave me a lot of push to put patient on insulin pump. Many of the patients were using insulin pump for 2-3 years, and later on, as the insulin resistance started coming down, many of them went off the insulin pump. So that was really exciting for patients to bring another patient for this thing, and they got rid of even the insulin also, many of them. As we all know, type 2 patients really are not insulin dependent, but in the 20-30 years ago, there was no other options. Today, we have so many oral molecules, and also, again, the requirement for insulin pump has gone down drastically in type 2 diabetes. So basically now those who are purely practicing pediatric and endocrinology or having centers for type 1 diabetes, they will be dealing more with the insulin pump. But I have seen number is gone down, and the future, as we see that now, the main game lies with the glucose sensors. I have used around around up to 5,000 glucose sensor in my practice so far, and I am realizing that now it's so easy for me to put a patient on glucose sensor. Earlier, it was really difficult, Medtronic with CGMS Gold, and put it in your neck while taking shower in a plastic bag, and and it falls, the sensor comes out. So many things were there, and the worst part, to make a notes and give them how to calibrate it 3 times in a day. All those things were really keeping me busy all the time, running around and listening their audio message on phone and telling them what to do. So now the technology is so simple. The glucose sensor Libre is so good and easy for everyone to use. Patient even don't ask the doctor; they only do by themselves, and they are available OTC. You can buy from any chemist in Mumbai or everywhere. So they are getting educated, they are getting trained. Apps are available on phone, and they are managing very beautifully. I think all of you have contributed a lot in educating patients in a couple of years, and they have become very smart and doing a good job. So I am very hopeful the sensors will be more accurate and more tiny as they are already, and maybe the sensors are going to come which will last for 6 months or so. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you. So I have 2 questions which have actually come up from Suresh's conversation here. And one is, let me start by asking Dr. Henry, who, besides being a pediatric endocrinologist, has also had a stint with the regulators. There was discussion on the day before the ATTD meeting started between the committee and the FDA, which were looking at time in range as a metric for clinical trial outcomes. And as we were told and realized that the FDA has rejected time in range as a hard metric in clinical trials, and still looking at probably GMI or sticking to other matrices. Your thoughts on that, Dr. Henry, about the future of TIR? Does it become just a clinical metric, or does it become a regulatory metric at any point?
Thank you, Manoj, for that question. I had the good fortune actually of attending that session and listening to the dialogue between our colleagues and thought leaders, as well as from members of industry, Medtronic, Abbott, and so on. And what I would say is as follows. From the agency, the FDA, as well as other regulators' perspective, what they have had as their only measure of long-term complications has been hemoglobin A1C. And the DCCT and EDIC studies have borne out the relationship between hemoglobin A1C and long-term complications. However, and to your point, time in range has gained so much momentum, and that, to Dr. Jyoti's point around definitions of what time in range, ideal time in range, what are the goals for percent of time in range, and so on, beyond A1C that we're now actually, I believe, at the cusp of a critical point in time. Do we move to time and range as being a primary endpoint, or do we take time and range as a co-primary endpoint or a primary endpoint by itself? And we know, for example, that time and range correlates quite well with hemoglobin A1C. So can we make that bridge? Since we know that time and range correlates so tightly with hemoglobin A1C. Therefore, as a proxy measure of long-term complications, just as hemoglobin A1C has served, can we look at time and range in the same way? I think that there are a couple of barriers to this. I don't think that the FDA or any other regulatory agency has reached the point, and in many respects, perhaps with good reason, if we think about how do we incorporate time and range when there may be fallout of data or failure of a sensor. How much time do we look at? Is it 2 weeks in a 3-month trial, 6 weeks in a 1-year trial? And so these kinds of conversations that have not yet fully matured provide some challenges which were attempted to be solved at this meeting, but more questions arose. So when you have a one measure, which is relatively reproducible, how do you contend with what someone was using perhaps as their baseline CGM, if they were using CGM? What is the role of blinded CGM? What is time and range? And also, companies are still struggling, knowing that there may be some resistance to use time and range as a primary endpoint. So for all of these reasons, there is still, I think, a struggle of what role time and range plays in the adoption of it as a primary endpoint stand by itself. You know, we saw, for example, the study, Dr. Manoj, that you mentioned, where there was a head-to-head comparison looking at time and range as a primary endpoint. But again, there is I think, a pivotal time now where some of these questions around the role of CGM, the technical challenges involved with the use of CGM as a primary endpoint will be solved, because at the end of the day, what do we use as a clinical, as a clinical outcome in practice? Time and range. I'll raise one more question, or perhaps a thought to contemplate. We know that hemoglobin A1C, for example, has challenges in being able to be consistent and standardized across multiple populations. So that, for example, in people of color or in individuals from the Black community here in the United States, as borne out by the T1D exchange, has demonstrated that perhaps someone who is of color, who has an A1C of 7.5 for the same time in range would be 7.0 in somebody who is white. Knowing this and appreciating the interaction and the consequences of engaging in dialogue with a patient who has a hemoglobin A1C of 7.5%, who actually has the same time in range as somebody with a hemoglobin A1C of 7%, it's quite clear. And Dr. Gupta, you talk about patients and patient centricity and the voice of the patient. What a challenge that presents in looking at hemoglobin A1C as a primary endpoint without taking into account all of these other pieces of information, including what we use as clinical outcome, the ability to use CGM as a time and range measure, as well as the other factors that are currently trying to be sorted out, not only in the US, but as borne out again by the hosts of this consensus, by individuals from all over the globe. So it's an exciting time. It's a challenging time. We're learning so much more about this, but there are still challenges both for A1C, for trial design, as well as for time and range.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clear explanation and sharing what you realized from that meeting. Probably, yes, in the years to come, it will be reconsidered. As you rightly said, the clinicians are already looking at TIR. For it to become a regulatory metric may take a while, just like HbA1c has its own limitations. At some point, TIR may get picked up. Which gets me to the next question.
Can I just come in, Manoj, again,
yeah,
just from a clinician's perspective, actually. So we have been using time and range, I think, quite frequently, actually, where we have this CGM, or even we use Libra quite a lot, actually. About 80 to 90% patients either on CGM or flash monitoring. So in clinical practice, it's very useful. And as really, I completely agree with Henry, what Henry said actually about regulatory, I think, because it will take some time, because you have to have a data, reliability, and evidence to confirm. HbA1c has got a limitation. And the big limitation of HbA1c is you get to see every 3 months, not every day, every few days. And that's the big issue with HbA1c, because you won't know what happened in the next 3 months, and we can't intervene. So I think in real-time CGM of some kind of flash monitoring is very, very effective. But regulatory people can't make it as a benchmarking because they don't have enough data in terms of reliability, in terms of evidence. So I think it's very promising. It's already helping in clinical practice in day-to-day basis. So I don't see HbA1c if I see better time and range. And I reassure that patients and family again to say, we are doing all right. And I think, again, with HbA1c, I think GMI may become another marker, actually. If time and range becomes reliable, then maybe we need to stay away from this finger prick blood test or regular blood test every 3 months, because it's a burden to the patients and the family, but also to the system. It costs money. So I think maybe next 5 years will hold the future brighter on these things, not now, but very useful in day-to-day clinical practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I respond
yes,
to you, Alok? I practice exactly the same way. And I find that time and range, and depending on how it's presented to the person living with diabetes, is a great tool. It's experiential learning, and you can use it from day to day. And I remember the resistance that existed around all of the SMBG companies standardizing their views of SMBG or CGM values. And so I am absolutely aligned with you 100% around the use of time and range. Absolutely. But, it's interesting because, we always joke, if you put 3 endocrinologists in a room, you'll get 5 different opinions. And so one of the most interesting things I think to come will be, how do we take action with the CGM data that we have? And so just like we have algorithms with continuous subcutaneous insulin delivery, how do we have algorithms that can assist in the absence of these closed loop systems or hybrid closed loop? And I had the opportunity to speak to some individuals at the ATTD who have some brilliant ideas and some data about what to do and how to turn CGM into reliable, data-supported, trial-supported, actionable data.
Thanks, Andy. I won't respond to this now, otherwise you'll take away from Manoj's next question. So leave it with Manoj now.
No, I think it's a free discussion, so you can do that. Trust me,
I'll let you carry on
as any. So not too many pre-planned questions. In fact, what I'm planning to do before we end the session, I'm going to have a rapid fire question round for all the 4 panelists and have your thoughts ready. And I'm giving you the questions in advance, which I'll ask. The 2 questions I'm going to ask in rapid fire to all 4 of you is, what technology you want to see in future, and I want all the 4 answers to be different. And second, the limitation in terms of where is it that you guys will not use an insulin pump. So these are the 2 questions that will come in rapid fire, and all 4 of you will go one by one giving me a single answer. But let me take this question ahead to Jyoti, and I can see Jyoti raise the hand, so I'll ask the question and Jyoti can reply together. Jyoti, if somebody's SMBG and HbA1c does not match, we recommend doing CGM, right? If tomorrow the TIR and HbA1c don't match, what do you do?
Yeah, before that, Manoj, let me make a suggestion if all of you agree. Why can't we prepare a paper and publish it based on this discussion? Because this is very different. And this is summarizing the entire conference. And we are discussing especially on the challenges using technology.
I think that's a wonderful idea, Jyoti. And we have everyone here who can contribute in writing this paper. And hopefully this journal itself will be the right forum for us to publish that. So I would request you, Jyoti, to take this up and summarize this and circulate amongst all the panelists here to add to that. And we take it as a paper on the challenges and future thoughts on technology. Can I see a thumbs up from everyone here for that? Excellent.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And Jyoti is the right person to take it forward. Well done, Jyoti.
Thank you, Dr. Alok. So we will prepare a draft and send it across. Okay, the major challenge I see using technologies, because we have been using technologies for more than 25 to 30 years, starting from I started using Ames reflectance glucose meter, and that was the first technology which I used. So it is still with me. So I have always wondered why the doctors are not adopting it. And the doctors are not adopting it because the doctors are not convinced with the accuracy. That is the number one reason. And there is a truth behind it. Every technology takes 10 or 15 years for evolution. And the glucometer took several decades, more than 2 decades for evolving. And now it is fairly very accurate. And the same is happening with insulin pumps. It took more than 50, 60 years for evolution. And now it is becoming almost automated. Now it is advanced hybrid closed loop systems. So CGM is actually in the way of evolution. So CGM was gold, and Dr. Suresh Purohit was actually narrating the past experience of using CGM as gold. Of course, I do agree. It was very, very cumbersome. And we used to remind the patients on calibration, and the moment they leave the hospital, it will start producing an alarm and it will stop. So it was cumbersome and nobody will use it. And then we thought that we will use it only for research purposes. So the CGM has evolved over the years. And now it is becoming more and more and more accurate. And for regulatory agencies such as FDA to approve a device or a new technology or a test, I believe that it should be fairly accurate. And when we are having different CGM devices in the market with varying MARD, varying accuracy, and with Libre 3 promising a MARD even less than 8%, then it is again challenging to use all of them for the same purpose of calculating a percentage TIR and a percentage time below range. And your question on when there is a disparity, I will say that nowadays we are recommending a continuous glucose monitoring and a measurement of percentage TIR in almost every patient. Every patient with type 1, of course, it goes without saying, if they cannot afford, we are providing them with the gadgets free of cost through our charity. And for type 2 diabetes, if the patient is willing and if they are available for a conversation, we tell them, this is very essential. And this is how this is going to be different from the hemoglobin A1C. And this is how it is going to be different from the structured SMBG. And this is very fairly accurate when compared to hemoglobin A1C. There are less chances of inaccuracies with this device. And the challenge happens when, and this can be the person with diabetes or with a physician, when we are using a CGM, let it be Dexcom or Libre, when we are using 100 CGM sensors, at least 5 to 8 sensors will be gone. At least they will be functioning only for 1 or 2 days, or they will fall away, but something will happen. And if this happens in the first 1 or 2 sensors they are using for the physician or for the patient, then again they will lose the confidence. So that is again challenging. And another major challenge which we have been facing, I don't know whether Dr. Alok and Dr. Henry has the same issue in your country, I don't know. When a person is on a CGM device or on an insulin pump and is having an emergency, and if they are in another hospital with a cardiologist or with a surgeon or with an orthopedic surgeon, and this happens very often, and even for a general surgery, they deny treatment. They say, oh, you are with so many medications and so many devices and I cannot touch you. And the physician there in the hospital, if they are also not aware of the device, and they will call upon some of us and then say that we cannot treat, please take him away from this hospital, go to some other hospital. And this we have even included in the guidelines for insulin pump, which we have published long ago. And even today morning, Dr. Manoj, I had a similar experience of a person with acute abdominal pain. And I got the message that she is diagnosed of CA colon. And she was denied a treatment in more than 4 hospitals in India. They were traveling. And he was using just a sensor. And there were multiple medications, and the doctors were reluctant to treat her because many medications are there and even a gadget is there and they are not familiar. So we need to probably do something to make our colleagues aware of the fact. And these colleagues are those colleagues closely working with us, the cardiology, the neurology, the nephrology, the urologists. Because I still remember the urologist treating a complication subsequent SGLT2 inhibitors, admitting the patient and treating pyelonephritis without knowing that this is drug-induced. And the SGLT2 inhibitors were still continued. So our forum should do something to educate and make aware our colleagues. So I don't know whether the same is happening in your country or not. So these are our personal experiences from India.
Yeah, I can put a small comment here.
Please.
Yeah, this is a very common issue with our colleagues, as you mentioned, orthopedic. So he understands everything about bones and he doesn't want to know anything about the diabetes. And especially other faculties also, and especially the anesthesia department also. Because the pre-operative checkup, they go there and he only rejects sometimes. So what I have a suggestion over here, because most of the super specialists are our friend otherwise also. So we can have a soft conversation with them off and on, rather than just food. Because once you are in super specialty, you know everything in the world. You don't want to listen anything more. That time they get little offended. But if we start a soft conversation by acknowledging them and for their great work, then it's easy for them to, listen to our conversation and get that thing. Yeah. So I agree with Jyoti Devan. I don't know what about Alok and Dr. Henry's side.
Okay, I can come in. Actually, I've got a couple of points, but I'll respond to Jyoti and Suresh first in terms of. So I think we were in the same situation about 15 to 20 years ago, where things were not working cohesively, collectively. People were working in isolation, and orthopedic surgeon would not touch our patients with diabetes or do something wrong, anesthetists, particularly in terms of surgery. So in the last 15 to 20 years, as a country in UK, we have tried very hard to produce a lot of national guidelines, framework, what we call National Service Framework, NSF, and NICE. But then a lot of things happened at a local level. And I think it's easy, in UK, because we have one hospital, which is NHS one, not many private hospitals as a system. So we brought a lot of policies, guidelines, framework, governance, we just really tighten up the governance. And we have champions, especially diabetes team, who are really talking to, having dialogues with all these people in the same hospital. But I don't think we are still 100% as yet. We are around 80%. I would say still things do go wrong. They don't deny it for treatment, but things don't work out very effectively. Wrong dose of insulin given, or no blood sugar check was done during surgery, that kind of stuff. The nonsense still goes. So maybe around 80%, 90% things, but it's still not 100%. So it took a lot of hard efforts, time, resources, unpleasant experiences, adverse events. But I think we're getting there. And that's something perhaps we need to do in India. But India is a lot more challenging, I think, because the health system is so diverse, from government to private to different kind of small to large, communication. So So maybe, but it's never late to start a small attempt to see what can we do together to make it better. So that's really one thing. I just want to respond to Manoj's original question about if there's a problem with time and range and HVNC. I think the really important point, again, I think I'm reactive again, Manoj. So sorry, I think you've already thought about it, but I'm saying it. You can't remove the doctor in the equation. If you just rely on HVNC and time and range, there's no role of healthcare professional in that system. And you know exactly the patient's profile. And there are a lot of other markers, soft to hard one, which will really help you to point to say the HVNC is better for me or time and range. And there's a number of reasons why would you say that. So can I suggest, because you can't just go and get over-the-counter interpretation of HVNC and time and range. Because in life, and maybe in future, 20 years time, they won't come to see doctors because they are very expensive, rare commodity. But for time being, I think the big role of doctors or healthcare professional to play to interpret that data for their patient much more reliably rather than relying on the machine, which could be unreliable at times. So that's a really strong message I want to really save our doctors community to make sure we still remain the most important part among technology.
I think excellent point, Dr. Gupta. And yesterday when I was speaking on CGM and during the inauguration, in fact, did quote a quote or a saying that make technology. I mean, as long as technology is your slave, it's fine. You make it your master, and then that's disaster. So, well, let me take. We have just limited time, so. One question which I want to throw open to all of you is on the evolution of delivery devices and pens. And we did see a lot of conversation at ATTD and during DTechCon on the connected pens and smart pens. So for the benefit of many of our colleagues who've joined in here, any of you who wants to take this question on what is really the difference between connected pens and smart pens and where do we go ahead from here? I can see Dr. Henry volunteering. I'll let Henry start, and then any of you can add to
that. Working at Embecta, which we heard was a spinoff from Becton Dickinson, there's a 100-year history of syringes. And the first dedicated insulin syringe in 1924 was made by BD, now Embecta. But then there was this gap. This huge gap, and it wasn't only with syringes, it was with all technology. And then this sudden uptake of technology, of insulin pumps and sensors and so on, miniaturization, etc. I think that from a technology around pens in particular, data collection is clearly important, and there's nothing more powerful than data. But to Alok's point, it's not going to be one size fits all. For some, a connected pen. For some, it's going to be a form of data capture that's not connected, perhaps represented in the pen. And I remember many years ago, Eli Lilly had produced a pen, a durable pen that had cartridges, and you were able to count and think of it this way as well. You know, we have a syringe in hand, we have in the US, not full adoption of pen devices yet, still using insulin syringe. But did you take the dose? Did you take half the dose? There's a syringe there. Did I use it? Did I not? And I can stand in front of my medication and say, did I actually take that pill from all the pills that are lined up? So the role that connected pens play and the data is only as powerful as the ability to use it. And as long as there are enough options for people to use them. I want to answer that quick fire answer. And I know, Alok, you're going to appreciate this. When we talk about what technology is most needed, we are not the audience to answer that question. It's the patient living with the disease. They're the ones to ask the question of what is the next technology that they need to have.
We'll still have the rapid fire with that question. Yes, Dr. Alok.
I think we need to really, I think I completely agree with Henry again. It's really, because as I said, I think we will do everything possible and the best possible thing for patients and families, but it won't work unless they feel the same. So definitely it comes down to the user group. We can give them the best product, but they may feel it's a rubbish. And one thing I think I was hoping, I think it may come up somewhere, the liability and responsibility from patients' perspective. When we really overwhelm them with various technologies and all this, have we ever thought about how many actions or decisions they need to make every day? In a simple diabetes with a manage on pens or injections, on basal bolus, they need to make around 70 decisions, active decisions every day. More technology you give it to them, more burden they have. And not everyone has got that ability to make that decision. Think about that way. So one pump itself could be 150 decisions they need to make, knowingly, unknowingly, being aware or not aware. So I think we need to perhaps come up with some technology which reduces that burden. Think about, I think, wearing a pump, wearing a sensor day on day. You don't want to attach your diabetes with your life. You want to lead your life thinking about, I don't have a diabetes as much as I need to think about it. It's very hard, still very hard. So we need to take that burden away. If there is some remote sensor could be used on dummy and then get the patient data, that's much better for them because somebody else is working for them rather than they need to make that decision. So when you ask your rapid fire, you need to think about, I think, that kind of answer into it, because there's no point giving 1,000 decision making for a poor child and family or adult who is doing a busy job somewhere else.
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Alok. And that is the reason the number of patients are avoiding technology. If you ask them, they said after using some days, then they said, it's okay, I will manage. My HbA1c was 8 before also, and it is 7.5. So I can manage it. There is no problem. So, and lot of consumables and lot of, in India, they have to pay from their pocket, So what they do, then they start extending the use of the cannula. So if it is for 3 days, they will start. One of my patient was not changing even for 10 days, And I had to really dig into it, what's happening. Then I found a big lump on his stomach and there is an abscess. And then he was threatening me, I will sue you because I got an abscess in the stomach, So all those things have happened, and that this technology is fine, but it should not be loaded on the patient, because patient come to us for relief and for treatment. They don't come here to learn more and more. Their children goes to IIT Bombay and IIT everywhere, engineering. That's fine. But once they are patient, they are patient. They come to doctor to take his opinion and get rid of the problem. And here we are putting more and more, like as you said, 150 decisions, knowingly or unknowingly. It's not an easy task. Many of the doctors I know, they don't even take their blood pressure pill every day. And they don't even treat themselves well. And they go through the stroke and everything. So it is...
Suresh, absolutely. Sorry.
We
got 3 minutes to take those 2 rapid fire questions and then hand it to Rakesh.
Okay.
So let's start. The order is going to be Suresh, Jyoti, Alok, and Henry in this round. Very, very crisp, small, short answer. Where will you not use an insulin pump? Starting with Suresh. Quick answers by all 4.
I will use everywhere.
Jyoti.
It works everywhere.
Fair. Jyoti?
I will not use an insulin pump in a person who is not motivated and a person who is not willing to learn.
Fair. Dr. Alok?
Patient choice. Jyoti stolen my answer. Not use where it's not a patient choice for whatever reasons. So important.
So not motivated patient is your answer as well.
Patient choice. If they're saying
choice.
no, you have to respect that no. Can't impose.
Right. And Henry?
So when we send a patient home with a vial and a pen, we say, listen, this vial will be a great drug for you, but if you take too much, it may kill you. And if you don't take enough, it's going to result in long-term complications. We know physiologically giving insulin through slow, continuous subcutaneous insulin infusion is physiologically better. Therefore, I started treating patients at diagnosis with insulin pump therapy, but without all of the different bells and whistles, should the patient desire, when faced with a vial or a syringe and faced with a pump, should they choose to use it, then they absolutely can. But I think that it's our obligation to give them the best technology to deliver insulin in a way that's most physiologic, that at the same time doesn't increase the burden to the patient.
Okay, great. And quickly now in the reverse order, starting with Henry, moving on to Alok, right? One future innovation that you wish for your patients.
So if we get past what it is that the patient wants, I think miniaturization of devices, reducing anything that will reduce the burden is going to be best for the patient. And therefore, I would say miniaturization, I think data analytics, again, everything that could potentially lift the burden from the patient, but it may not necessarily be a technological solution.
Okay. Dr. Alok.
A quick one, really, but maybe two options. Really. One, in terms of technology, I want a complete artificial or closed loop system where the patient doesn't have a really burden to manage. Or maybe a stem cell, really, which is beyond technology, really, but that's something. So we need to take that burden away from patient to say you are really, for all practical purposes, you're not diabetic. In a sense,
maybe a cure for type 1 with stem cell is what you're hoping for as the future.
Yeah, that may be beyond technology, but before that, complete loop rather than partial loop.
Sure. Dr. Jyoti and then Suresh.
My dream is to have an advanced optical sensor for a reliable CGM with my Apple Watch.
Well, that may not be too far away, Jyoti. That really may not be too far away.
And even a closed loop is not far away, I believe. As Dr. Alok said, we are almost 85% done with closing the loop. Absolutely. So maybe after 2-3 years. But that is going to be a disruptive technology. That is going to be something challenging even for the doctors. That is what I believe. Okay.
Suresh, your final thought.
So closed loop system will be my expectation. Yeah.
Okay. So everybody is hoping for more closed loops and maybe diagnosis in type 1. Well, I would just request all of you to start imagining more, because the more you imagine, that's going to happen. So let's imagine for far more than just the closed loop. And so thank you, gentlemen. It's been wonderful.
Manoj, can I just put a final point? I think is really important.
Because we move
just as a provocation for thoughts, really. I don't think we have talked about other than just pump and CGM, but we need to think about what other aspects of diabetes which can help improve with technology. So like simple example, carbohydrate counting. How do you calculate the insulin doses? And I think those technology in one big word is, how do we connect all this, the jigsaw pieces of the puzzle, which can really effectively manage your diabetes management much better. My children struggle with carb counting, how to get the insulin doses, all this kind of nonsense comes.
There are some wonderful apps now, Dr. Alok Gupta, and very, very regional apps, because yes, the carbs can be different in Indian food and the food held elsewhere. So there are these apps now available which are actually helping patients with carb counting. And yes, technology is
they don't connect. My issue is they don't connect. We use all the apps really, but they don't talk to each other really, and that's really
integration. I think one of the things we all can hope for is better integration. Yes, Rakesh.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Manoj, for moderating the session. I would just say that other than the routine technology that we talk about, insulin pumps and CGMs, probably I'm more hopeful with the biotechnology like stem cell therapy, genetic engineering, gene therapy, those kind of things. If they can, probably in distant future, if they can cure the disease completely, that might be a little distant objective. Sorry to interrupt, but then we probably should close the session now because validity function is going to be started soon in Hall A.
I would also like to make a very brief comment because all the stalwarts are here. I know all of you must have watched various James Bond movies, and there is a concept called of smart blood. The James Bond is injected with his smart blood, and after injecting that very nanoparticle, the person in the room is able to track his movement all across the world and all his vital parameters. So maybe someday nanotechnology will allow us to inject something that will be able to constantly transmit the data, glucose data, insulin data, C-peptide levels, whatever we believe.
I mean, Google is already doing that. Google is already doing that to many of us. It's tracking everything that we are saying.
Yeah, that's a risky, I think, and I think my wife doesn't get that nano.
Dr. Amit, if you can, put the link of Hall A here. Probably some of them may not have a link to Hall A.
Sir, what I will do is that I will, yes.
In the group chat, yeah, okay. Yes. It's there already. So
yes, it is already there.
Dr. Manoj, once you conclude the session,
now
maybe you can go there.
Now, thank you everyone for the wonderful panel discussion. Dr. Raju, Dr. Henry, Dr. Jyoti Dev, and Dr. Suresh and Dr. Manoj. Now I will end, and all of you are requested to invite for the valedictory function, which is going to be held on the Hall A. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful. Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye, sir.